is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Her Who Stats podcast and happy new year. Welcome to 2026 and a very special welcome from myself, Tyler DeLuca, and Brittany here joining me because, Brittany, we got some actual great games to talk about, and I feel like it's been forever, frankly. December was a little bit of a drag. I don't know how was it for you? Did it feel like that for you as well?
Yeah, I think December is always a little tough on the women's side for sure. Just a lot of games that don't catch a lot of eyes, and for whatever reason, I think it's tough with finals week.
Sure.
Depending on when schools have those to schedule matchups and trying to give time off around Christmas, and then obviously the month just flies by
Yeah.
because it feels like there's a million things to do, not just basketball things. So, but finally made it to 2026 and super excited about what we're going to get in 2026 for this college season.
Yeah, we made it to 2026. We made it to conference play. And conference play this year especially. And I don't know if it's because like my feelings on non-con and feeling like we didn't have like the volume of big games, but I am so excited for this conference play in particular. It feels like there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and that's a great thing I feel like to have at the halfway point of the season, if you will. I don't want to know the answers yet. And we're about to find out a lot of them for a whole lot of teams over the course of January as a month, as conference play as a whole. I mean, there's a lot of big games coming up, and we're starting off pretty hot here. So let's take it to the SEC to begin here. LSU hosting Kentucky. This is LSU's first major test. Obviously, Duke was the other kind of Power 4 team that they got to play. Duke, not the Duke team we expected when we kind of saw that game on the preseason schedule. That was kind of supposed to be like, hey, this could be an Elite Eight matchup, a Power 4, like, or a Final 4 matchup potentially. Like, there was genuine, like, very high stakes looking ahead to that game. That game didn't pan out the way we anticipated in terms of where Duke was. Now I think almost maybe in a potential opposite way where it's like, hey, Kentucky is at a way higher spot right now than maybe people gave them credit for. I know, speaking selfishly and personally, it's higher than I had anticipated. But now we get two games where Kentucky's played some decent competition. Not every game has been against a stacked Power 4 team, but nobody's is. But this is easily for both teams the top test that they will have faced so far this season. And again, a chance to, especially for LSU, again, we've done this dance before when it comes to the LSU dialogue of, all right, well, let's see what happens when we get to conference play. And normally things go pretty well for LSU, but they're going to be starting off here off the bat with Kentucky. Just general thoughts, like what are you excited to maybe try and learn from this game? And we could then dive into more of the preview on each side of it.
Yeah, I think just in general, with probably the best opponent that either one has faced. So it's going to be interesting. And then I think the stakes are always raised when you get into conference play.
Sure.
So I think that first game you have a lot on the line because every game matters. And with this, I think, like you said, the dialogue surrounding LSU has always been, they figured out how to manipulate the net, right? So everyone every year going into this kind of was always like, where are they? They always seem to answer the bell. I think the guard court of LSU is really good.
Sure.
But I think they're going to be presented with some front court from the other side in Kentucky. And so that's what I'm really interested to see is how does Kentucky's guards match with LSU's, and then vice versa, the front court of LSU with the front court, of Kentucky. And that to me are the two things that are really going to be the focal point of that matchup.
Yeah, I completely echo that sentiment. That's what I'm excited to see is how can either team handle their potential weakness being the strength of the other team? Because that is fully what this matchup feels like in a lot of ways. And look, the talent that LSU has on the perimeter, I mean, I don't know if you can compare it to anywhere else, frankly, just in terms of just the pure volume of talent within that big three that all are able to play defense, that are all able to handle the ball, that can, there's not much on the court that any time that you have two of those players on the court, you're pretty much going to be solid on the perimeter. And you got to have guards that are able to respond to that on both sides of the ball as well. Because again, like these are like legit, the steals numbers, again, everything kind of has to have an asterisk for me, at least when talking about the numbers because of the competition. But ultimately, they're still out there doing it. They're doing what they're supposed to do in those matchups, and they have been the entire non-conference time. So the defense that they can provide on the perimeter, obviously the offense, I feel like in a lot of ways speaks for itself. If you haven't seen a Miles and Full Wiley clip, I doubt anybody here that's listening to this podcast hasn't seen a Miles and Full Wiley just ridiculous offensive clip. Obviously, you can say the same with Flaugier or with Michaela Williams. Like it's ridiculous. And Kentucky, I don't know what they have like that the volume of or depth to definitely not to go talent for talent, but even trying to just to match up in general. And that's not even a knock on Kentucky. That's a strength of LSU because there's not
Yep.
many teams that can do that. But also, I think you can kind of say the same with Kentucky with their bigs. I mean, Tiani Key, Claire Strack, like they have been very solid over the course of this non-conference time. And LSU, I've liked what I've seen in some of the flashes from the bigs, but they're young, and that is now like when you go into the SEC. I mean, this is one of the best big duos that you're going to find in the SEC this season, from what we've seen so far. So you're immediately going to potentially, from an LSU perspective, like you're going to become like, this is your first like true battle test to me in terms of like matching up with size that not only has the size but also the skill, and that is going to be incredibly interesting to see for me. And I just feel like there's going to be so many questions that are, I think, going to be raised from this game. I think we're going to leave this game. We're not leaving this game with the answers for
Right.
either of these teams. But I mean, I just think to me going into conference play, and I'd love to know if you agree with this, but to me, the pressure gets put on LSU in conference play so heavily because of the non-conference, where it's like, man, one slip up, even if it's not against like some major upset, like if you go and lose this game to Kentucky, that's number 11 beating number 5. That's not some like insane, incredible upset in terms of like, oh, this unranked team that's at 500 goes into Baton Rouge and beats LSU. But the reaction will likely be as if that happened because of the competition that LSU has played. Where do you think about from like a team mentality? Like again, LSU has done pretty much across the boards as Kim Mulkey's got there. They've always, to your point, answered the bell. So like, I'm not like projecting this to happen, but like, how do you feel like that shifts potentially like the mindset of the pressure on conference play?
Well, I think because they have the veteran backcourt that
Mm,
they do, that have had so much experience at the highest level in the
sure.
biggest games, that can alleviate whatever the front court players might feel
Mm,
in those
mhm,
moments. And so I think that I mean, especially Fajay and Michaela Williams, who have been a part of that program for 2 3 years, they
yeah.
understand that this is how it is. Now it's time to kind of ramp it up. And so I think very familiar. And then you have, Fulali, who's obviously really been seamless in her
Mhm,
transition there. And so, to me, I think when you have that guard experience, that makes it a little bit easier going into conference play, just
mhm,
because you do understand, and I think guards, we often say this, I think, whether true or not, guards can kind of win for you
sure.
in March or whatever you
Mhm,
want to say. Like, and so I think the reliance that they can have on that guard court to kind of take away whatever the front court might not or
mhm.
might give them, I think will be a big factor for LSU. But I think, again, Kim Mulkey does a wonderful job of getting her team prepared. I think they understand now you have to kind of flip that page, become a little bit more serious. Everything is, raised another level once you enter conference play.
Yeah, so this becomes a game where, again, for LSU, it's kind of like a prove you're where you're at, like for the right reason, you know. And for Kentucky, again, a team that's ranked 11, so it's like this isn't some like ultimate underdog or anything like that. But Kentucky has not been like in the national dialogue in this way, so this could
Not at all.
it
Yeah.
very much be an announcement to the rest of the nation. It's like, hey, we're here to play in the SEC. I mean, and just joining the mass amount of teams it feels like in the SEC that are ready to like be genuine competitors in postseason play. I mean, that SEC tournament has a chance just to be ridiculously chaotic, frankly. But this is, I feel like, right off the rip here, an incredible matchup to answer questions about two teams that maybe we haven't gotten the most volume of maybe real tape, quote unquote, in non-conference play. So I'm very excited for this one. A couple teams that certainly one team that has done their job in terms of not ducking any smoke in non-conference play has been Iowa. And that is the other ranked matchup that we have, and that is Nebraska traveling to Iowa. This is a really fun one. The Big Ten is a very interesting conference to me because it does feel like UCLA like is pretty much a step above everyone, but like below that, I mean, goodness, the amount of different changes and things that could just go in the chaos of pretty much anyone outside of UCLA. And I just feel like that someone's bound to knock off UCLA at some point just on the talent and having like the right night and having the right game, just because the Big Ten it's a little bit convoluted. I feel like in the middle, but there's a lot of good teams, and that's the reason why. I'm just what are you maybe trying to hoping to gather from this game here between Nebraska and Iowa?
Well, I think first off, it'll be Nebraska's first big road test,
Mm,
and that I think is always going to be really important to see how they go onto the road, and then how do you respond? You just lost at home, you were undefeated to USC the other day, and I thought honestly, watching that game, Nebraska. Um, Maybe better than what I thought they would
mm,
against that USC team, having not really faced
yeah.
a real good opponent up until that point where USC had been battle tested a few
Mhm.
times. And so I think for this Nebraska team, just a really important game to go on the road and kind of see where you're at and how you respond after that first defeat. But I think, if anything, some confidence also gained from that game against
Sure.
USC. Certainly not the outcome that they wanted, but they showed they can compete at that level with those teams. And so to me, that it's going to be really interesting. And on the flip side, Iowa, I think for them, they've seen kind of everything in the non-con, like you said, just a really tough schedule and certainly prepared. But again, kind of flipping that switch, you have a home game conference. So to me, it's kind of just taking care of business, showing up. It'll be really interesting because the styles. I think Nebraska is actually playing at a little bit faster pace than what Iowa has this
Mhm,
year,
mhm.
and so typically when you're talking about an Iowa team, you're talking about getting up and down,
Sure.
scoring the points, but that hasn't really been the case for them this season, and so I really think Iowa has a big advantage inside.
Mhm.
Nebraska, I would say that would be their one weakness, just not having a ton of great posts. And
Mhm.
when you talk about Iowa, you're talking about Hannah Stolke, you're talking about Hayden, you're talking
Sure.
about, Deal, all those players that are kind of those bigs. And so I think that's going to be the really interesting, matchup for me.
I like the point you made about the Nebraska and kind of finally getting their first test with USC and getting that out of the way, and not like, obviously not the outcome you want, but I'm always interested because I feel like there is something to say about, like, you have there's some degree of testing that is beneficial, even if you take a couple losses in non-conference play. And Nebraska didn't have that fully, but also, like, this is a program that, like, rattling off wins also hasn't been like super common either, and that could be very important as well. And so I this game becomes very interesting, and I think I'm going to take away a lot from the Nebraska perspective, one way or the other. How do they respond? Because we haven't seen them have to kind of get back up after getting knocked down. And I'm interested as well, like, because again, in my head, I'm like thinking like taking a couple losses in non-con or being in close games and toughing them out. That matters to me. Like that is like when I think about trust in terms of like going into conference play or eventually going into postseason play. Like those games matter to me. And I'm always interested in like how many games does that take, and like how fast can you potentially get up to speed. And so I'm interested now in seeing, okay, you have that first game against a USC team that has certainly been battle tested in their own right. I'm excited to see again what does a punch back look like after you get knocked down and you stand back up and you have to go against another battle tested team. What does that look like, and how fast can this Nebraska team be learners? And is what I'm really interested in seeing. And again, that doesn't even necessarily mean like, oh, if you lose the game, you didn't learn, because I don't think that's the case here. Even if they go out and Iowa wins this game, so
Yeah.
I'm very interested in what the makeup of Nebraska looks like in terms of, again, just the resiliency and being able to bounce back, and even just playing another close game here, I think is very important, just to try and kind of not say that you're gonna like sink the ship if you go and lose this game and you like lose it in a way that doesn't feel good, but like this game matters where you're trying to you don't want to go undefeated in non-con and then just immediately drop the first in Big Ten play, in conference play. That would not feel good for the confidence whatsoever. Like so,
No,
I yeah, go
yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
I think too, like when you talk about after UCLA, that conference from 2 to, let's say 14,
Hmm.
just throwing a number out there, there isn't a ton of separation.
No.
And so I think these are the games that are extremely important
Hmm.
that you're going to look back on come March, like if we would have, or,
Hmm.
whatever that may be on this outcome. And so that's why I think this one, and it's a rivalry game
Sure.
too, certainly just because they are so close in proximity, state-wise anyway. But I think that's what's going to be the really important part in those games is
Hmm.
that separation is going to matter in March. So
Yeah.
you're looking at this game in January and thinking, oh, maybe it's not going to be that big deal one way or the other. But when your standings are in March, it's going to matter. And so, like you said, I think the bounce back is going to be really interesting on the
Hmm.
Nebraska side.
Yeah, and looking at it from the Iowa perspective, I think I've talked about this before on this podcast, but Hannah Stolke is a player that like I see the visual. I think that there's like a genuine like WNBA player like within the mold of Hannah Stolke, and I this felt like the year was like okay, like you are kind of being given the keys. Like the league guard isn't there in that way, and I feel like we haven't kind of gotten like the full spread that I had hoped for, maybe in terms of a bit more like the versatility and just the stat production and whatnot. I want to see us get rolling with that in Big Ten play, and like now it's kind of not now or never, but like kind of now or never. Like I mean, we're here. Like it's January. Like it's kind of that time. So I'm really looking forward to seeing if anything kind of changed with that. Not that she's been bad. I think I have like such a high like projection expectation, if you
Mhm.
will, like with Stolke, that like I want to see her lead this team in scoring. Like even though Ava Hayden has been very very solid, like and has been very good. Like I want to see and feel that impact with Hannah Stolke, and I feel like there's been a couple games where we haven't felt that all the way, and I don't a player of that caliber and a player with that like potential of versatility, I want to feel the impact in some type of way. And this is a game in particular where I really feel like the impact can be felt. And like I want the fingerprints all over this game from Hannah Stolke. So that's another thing from an Iowa perspective in terms of maybe raising that caliber and raising that tier within the Big Ten and trying to be a bit more of a threat on the national level and going into March Madness. To me, that's the big piece here is if Hannah Stolke can kind of truly kind of grow into, even if it's not necessarily the number one option, like just to have like the potential to go and be that on a night to night basis in the Big Ten would be massive. And again, to me, this is a perfect matchup just roster wise. And I think the makeup of these teams to try and go do that and get really the ball rolling with that. There's been a couple of standout performances already from Stolke, but again, I want to see that on a night to night basis in the Big Ten where we are seeing that impact and feeling that impact in the fingerprints all over the game. So that's something I'm kind of eyeing for Iowa here. And I mean, again, that goes with I can't not mention Chit Chat.
Yeah, I was gonna
I
say
love Chit Chat.
her and
Yeah,
Britt Prince, I think, will be a really fun matchup to
yeah,
watch as well. Just because, again, Chit Chat Right's been such a great
yeah,
addition to that Iowa team, and I think someone that flew kind of under the radar when
sure.
she went there from the portal this year, but a really really fun player to watch, and I think again, kind of a name that is gonna be heard more and more over the
Mhm.
next couple months as the conference season ramps up.
Yeah, I tweeted this out, but like Chit Chat, like having that cool of a name and then having a fun enough game on the court to back up having that name is incredible. Like sign me up. I'm buying all the Chit Chat stocks. Like I'm all in. Like I love watching her play. I love saying her name. Like I mean, it's just such a just what a fun like basketball player. Like in total, like just incredible. So I'm completely on board, and I think to your point, I think there was a lot of like recruiting wins for Iowa where like maybe the transfer wins went a little bit under the radar, and Chit Chat has absolutely shined past whatever limited expectation or discussion going into this season about like her impact here. And again, I think this was kind of the first year, like where I think with Olsen going over to Iowa, like you felt like okay, this is a bridge year and everything. This maybe felt like more like the first rebuild year, truly, like
Yeah.
after Caitlin Clark left and Iowa. I mean, again, even just getting through non-con in the way that they did, just I'm impressed with what the program has been able to stabilize as. And again, there's still recruiting wins, and I think there's still more to come. But I'm excited to see like where Iowa is as a program, just even generally speaking, by the time we get to the end of his season and what goes on from there. Because I've been very impressed with Jen Jensen and the way that this program has been able to stabilize itself in the postmortem of the Caitlin Clark era. Been very, very impressed. And I mean, there's a lot of young players on this team that are going to be very foundational in what is the post Caitlin Clark era at Iowa. So it's been very fun to watch. It's been a very kind of interesting, not case study, but I've kept an eye on it from that perspective, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job. And this is another game to go and prove that look, they're not going anywhere, and I don't think that they are. So I'm very excited for this one. But with it being 2026, we got to project a little bit. Maybe not a resolution per se, but we gotta look ahead just a little bit. National Player of the Year, I think has it become even more exciting than I had anticipated. Like we knew who some of the top players in the country were, but the race that we are going to get, I think, is going to genuinely go down to the wire, and I think it's going to be very much voter by voter. What do you believe is the definition of National Player of the Year? And Lord knows that can get messy when it comes to voters and how they define things and everything. But I truly feel like that's kind of what we're getting down to. Whether it be the two teammates in stores, just splitting the hairs between those, or Audie Crooks, Hannah Hidalgo. I mean, there's so many names that are going on here. This is one of the most exciting races that we've seen in a minute. I feel like I'm very very excited for this one. Where are you at with National Player of the Year?
Yeah, I think, I mean, like you said, it's going to be really exciting.
Mhm,
I think what's going to be really interesting, and I said this the other day when Jamie and I were on with Sarah and AZ, is that the Big East is really down. And
yeah,
so like the other day, they beat Butler by almost 50. The leading score was 15 points. And
mhm,
so it's to me, it's like I feel like sometimes numbers are the only thing that are looked at. And so will those numbers be enough
mhm,
at the end of this conference, season come March for both of those players?
mhm,
And so it's certainly going to be interesting to see how many minutes they are playing and what that production looks like over the next couple months for both of those players,
yeah,
just in terms of the competition, because they aren't in a league like the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, where I think they're getting really, really tested
mhm,
on, at least a weekly or biweekly basis.
sure,
And so that's going to be really interesting. But I think that comes down to, like you said, personal preference in
yeah,
voting for those two players. And then you have a player like Audie Crooks that I think, to just maybe the general person that watches, will just think because of her size, and her scoring points, that they don't really understand the rest of her game, just in
sure,
terms of her touch and her footwork and all the other things. And to
mhm,
be shooting the percentage that she
ridiculous,
is incredible.
mhm,
And so I think that has to be appreciated, but it's also going to be really interesting to see what the conference season brings
yeah,
for Iowa State. Right now she's been talked about, obviously, because her numbers have been incredible, but they're also undefeated. So
yeah,
that might change,
mhm,
obviously, as the conference season goes on. And then, two other teammates in Rory Harmon and Madison Booker, I think could
yes,
both be talked about as well in that
mhm,
conversation. But again, that's a preference thing.
no,
So it's tough. I mean, I think, like, generally speaking, I think if you just look Sarah Strong's numbers across the board in
mhm,
terms of like every statistical category are hard to ignore. But then you look at what AZ Fudd is doing,
yeah, ridiculous,
just yeah, but then it's like, okay, but then Audie Crooks is shooting
sure,
70, so yeah, Tyler, I don't know what that
yeah,
looks like. My biggest concern about Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd is the numbers game,
yeah,
just in terms of what that looks like come March. Because
yeah,
if it's significantly different than maybe what they're up against, I
mhm,
don't know how much that changes, but also you're probably talking about them being undefeated,
right.
which obviously helps cases too.
Yeah, I think to me it's the give and take of the Big East is very interesting because I completely agree with your point on the fourth quarters and like because it's one thing I remember like with to make it about men very quickly, very very quickly
Yes.
because ew, but like on the NBA side you have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Nikola Jokic going for the MVP and SGA wasn't playing in fourth quarters, but they're playing common opponents. And that's like the big thing with that argument where it's
Mhm.
like, well, you're playing fourth quarters because they're blowing everybody out and it's the same teams that the other guys. But that's not what it is here with the Big East. Like there is obviously a talent discrepancy that is very much going to be factored into this. And I think the big thing is going to be the win loss record is kind of
Yeah.
what I'm thinking is that it's going to come down to because like Hannah Hidalgo isn't even like fully in the conversation in the way that her stats say she is, and that's because of the win loss record. And so it's like if they can go rattle off the whole ACC and go and especially they go beat UConn and go make that moment, maybe we're right there and Hannah Dog goes right back in this. Like if Audie Crooks and if Iowa State goes and only wins, like if they only lose like one game, it's probably gonna be hard to deny her. But if any of these teams start dropping multiple games, and I kind of feel like it's the same way like Texas is gonna have it's an interesting thing because obviously the SEC schedule is going to just be much tougher
Right.
than the Big East schedule. But they're not going to have the stats of UConn, I don't think either, just because naturally that's just kind of the style of both
Mhm.
both Madison and Rory as players, but also
Yep.
Texas as a team. It's just not they're not really going to run it up on anybody in that way. That's just not the way that Vic Schaefer's teams play, and like it works, it wins, so you can't knock it. But in terms of trying to split hairs here for that award, to me, it's going to be like if UConn just wins out, unless it's going to take the win loss records, I think from these players, which is always a bit weird when you factor that into an individual player award. But like to me, that's what's going to be the hair splitter here because literally. Audie Crooks is historical. Izzy Fudd is being historical right now. Sarah Strong has like sometimes it's the stats that are historical, but even just like watching Sarah Strong is like we've never seen a player do the things that you're doing right now. Like it
Mhm.
feels historical. Like I feel like I am watching one of the
As a
next greats.
sophomore.
100%, you know, so it's like even just like it feels historical when you're watching it, which is also a very big part here. So I'm fully locked into the win-loss record here because to me, when you're looking at MVPs or anything, I've always said it's about stats, standings, and story. And like to me, the stats are UConn stats are probably going to be there. I mean, well,
Yeah.
even without the fourth quarter, it'll probably be enough, especially with the context of not playing the fourth quarter. I think that'll be factored into it enough. And I also think it helps, frankly, that UConn has this like obviously the history of UConn where it's like it's okay to give UConn National Player of the Year. You know,
Yeah.
like it has happened plenty of times, I promise, you know. So there's not
Right.
like this like I don't know if this stigma maybe is as strong as like it would you would think it to be just because hey, it's UConn, you know, so like if people I think have maybe are able to get past that a little bit easier. And also like Audie Crooks not doing it in the SEC is I think also going to play a part here where it's like I don't know how much respect the Big 12 has from a national voter base in that way where it's like I don't know how much the difference is, frankly, in the respect for the Big East versus the Big 12 from a national voter. Hey, maybe if you don't cover the Big 12, I don't know what that looks like. And and that'll be part of what kind of the equation here that I'm super interested in seeing because we haven't had like a true, like, I mean, Madison Booker was at like in her freshman year in the Big 12 and certainly was a player that was on a national level. But before that, it had been a minute since I kind of having like true like national player of the year caliber out of
Mhm.
the Big 12. And that Big 12 was very different than the Big 12 that we have now with all the conference realignment and everything. So I'll be very interested in what kind of weight is put onto that as well. And then who knows what type of the thing I think that worries me about UConn in splitting between those two players and everything is like who's gonna have the moment because I feel like every national player of the year has a moment, and that's like where the story really kicks in. And
Mhm.
if you're just blowing everybody out, and also notably Notre Dame and Tennessee not having the years that like you would generally think of them to have as programs, you don't have the South Carolina game on the schedule. I don't know exactly where that moment comes from. And so if it gets down super tight and Audie Crooks goes and hits a game winner and beats Baylor, you know, and it's a crazy 40-point game with a game winner, that's a moment that is going to be hard to kind of shake out of your brain. I'm interested into seeing if anything like that comes into play and just true like storyline momentum where it can be easy to almost not ignore UConn, but like with so much going on with it, we're gonna have ranked SEC matches every night, you know, or in the Big 12, we're gonna have these big time matches, Big 10 as well. I'm I'm interested in seeing if there becomes a lull on UConn in terms of the storyline of the season, and I hope it doesn't. I don't want that to happen because UConn is doing, and these two players are ridiculously. I mean, again, historical is the word for both of these players right now. So I hope that that doesn't happen. But there's so much dialogue and storyline. I mean, we've seen it for years with National Player of the Year how that factors into the vote. So I'm very interested in that. But goodness, again, maybe just a much more intriguing race than I had anticipated preseason because like we not knew like yeah, Sarah Strong's the best player in the country. Like it's pretty easy to say that going into this year and. I think maybe I, in my head, like personally, have been like, okay, well, best player in the country, sure, she'll probably be National Player of the Year. I think that's a pretty safe bet. It's not nearly as safe as I had anticipated, and I love it. I am so overjoyed that this is where we're at with it. So I'm
Yeah.
stoked.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think, we're finally seeing, the healthy, really good version of AZ Fudd. So,
Yes,
that I think was also not talked about enough, just what she's gone throughout her college career, and
yeah,
now this
100%.
you're seeing and I mean, and again, you're talking about historical, like, I mean, those numbers she's putting up as a guard are super, super impressive,
Yeah,
and so, but I think, like you said, success can sometimes just be taken for granted.
hmm
And it's like, well, yeah, UConn's supposed to win. They're supposed to do that. So
hmm
I think you're right. The storyline will be kind of the big separator maybe when it comes down to it. But I think if anything, this season, I think the product and the parity of what we're seeing in women's college basketball is going to provide us with
yeah,
plenty of storylines
yeah.
that I think someone is going to separate themselves.
Well, Brittany, whatever those storylines are, we'll be on the Her Hoop Stats pod to talk about it. So make sure you're tapped in all across the board, whether it's on your podcast platform, on YouTube, on social media, of course, so you're notified whenever we drop. Make sure you're tapped in. And of course, a happy new year. Conference play is here. We'll be here. we'll hope you're here to join us and listen to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. Wherever you find it, we expect and hope to see you here soon.